The US Supreme Court recently addressed a significant case. It involved public funding for a religious charter school. St. Isidore of Seville Virtual Catholic Charter School in Oklahoma was at the center. The school sought to operate with state money. This raised immediate constitutional questions across the nation. The decision, announced on May 22, 2025, was closely watched. It promised to clarify boundaries between church and state in education. Many legal experts anticipated a landmark ruling. The High Court's action ultimately blocked public funding for St. Isidore. This decision affirmed an earlier ruling by the Oklahoma State Supreme Court. The state court had found that funding the religious charter school would violate state law. It also cited violations of the U.S. Constitution. The school had planned to offer online religious instruction. It aimed to serve around 500 students from kindergarten through high school. The denial of funds halts these specific plans for a state-supported religious curriculum. Intrigue surrounds the specific vote count of the Supreme Court justices. Initial reports presented conflicting narratives, creating some confusion. One account suggested a 4-4 deadlock. In this scenario, Justice Amy Coney Barrett recused herself without stating a reason. A tie vote would mean the lower court's ruling stands, but sets no new national precedent. The individual votes in such a split were not disclosed, but appeared to follow ideological lines among the remaining justices. Conversely, other prominent reports indicated a 6-3 decision against the funding. This version states Chief Justice John Roberts authored the majority opinion. Such an opinion would emphasize that public funds for a religious school breach the Establishment Clause. It would highlight the importance of maintaining church-state separation. Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Amy Coney Barrett reportedly dissented in this scenario. They argued the decision discriminates against religious institutions and limits parental choice in education. The differing accounts leave the ruling's immediate precedential power somewhat ambiguous. The heart of this legal battle lies in the First Amendment. Specifically, the Establishment Clause was the central constitutional issue. This clause famously prohibits the government from making any law respecting an establishment of religion. Its purpose is to prevent government actions that would create or endorse a dominant religion. It ensures a degree of separation between governmental powers and religious institutions. This principle has been debated and interpreted for centuries in American law, forming a cornerstone of religious freedom. Historically, taxpayer funds for public schools have not been available to overtly religious institutions. The Establishment Clause has been interpreted to mean that public money should support secular education. This is to avoid compelling taxpayers to support religious teachings they may not agree with. While some indirect aid to students attending religious schools has been permitted, direct funding of religious schools as public entities has been a contentious line. The St. Isidore case directly challenged this long-standing interpretation, pushing for a new understanding. The St. Isidore of Seville Virtual Catholic Charter School sought to become the nation's first religious charter school fully funded by taxpayers. This was a bold move. It aimed to redefine the relationship between religious education and public funding structures. The Catholic Archdiocese of Oklahoma City and the Diocese of Tulsa were set to run the school. They argued that charter school frameworks should be open to religious providers. This stance directly confronted established legal precedents concerning public education funding. Those arguing against funding St. Isidore invoked the Establishment Clause forcefully. They contended that providing public money to an institution with an explicit religious mission would clearly violate this constitutional safeguard. Oklahoma Attorney General Gentner Drummond was a key voice in this opposition. He argued that such funding would effectively mean the state was endorsing a particular religion. This, he and others maintained, would erode the foundational principle of separation between church and state, a principle designed to protect all religious beliefs by keeping the government neutral. Opponents of funding St. Isidore raised serious concerns about public accountability. Attorney General Drummond warned that approving this school would open the door. He argued it would compel the state to fund other religious schools. This could potentially include schools with radical or exclusionary ideologies. For Drummond, The Supreme Court's decision to block funding was a victory. He saw it as upholding religious liberty and fundamental American principles. Public funds, in this view, must remain dedicated to secular purposes to serve all citizens equally. Supporters of blocking the funding widely praised the decision. They viewed it as a crucial defense of the constitutional separation of church and state. Many organizations and individuals emphasize that public education funds are intended for schools that are open to all students, regardless of religious belief. Using these funds for a school that would inherently promote one faith over others was seen as a misuse of taxpayer money. They argued this separation protects both government neutrality and the autonomy of religious institutions from government interference. On the other side, St. Isidore and its proponents expressed deep disappointment. They argued that denying the school charter status and associated funding was an act of discrimination based on religion. The school contended that it met all other criteria for a charter school. Therefore, its religious character should not be a barrier to receiving public support. Representatives for the school stated they were exploring other avenues. They still hoped to provide virtual Catholic education, albeit without the direct state funding they had sought. Those who favored funding St. Isidore, including various religious groups and some education reform advocates, criticized the ruling. They claimed it unfairly targeted religious schools. They also argued it restricted educational options for families seeking alternatives to traditional public schools. For these supporters, the decision limits parental choice. They believe parents should have the option to choose a publicly funded education that aligns with their religious values. The debate highlights a fundamental disagreement over the role of religion in publicly supported education systems. The immediate consequence of the Supreme Court's action is clear for St. Isidore. The virtual Catholic charter school will not receive the approximately $23.3 million in state funding it was slated to get over 5 years. This funding was crucial for its plan to offer online religious instruction to students from kindergarten through high school. The school's establishment as a publicly funded religious entity is now blocked. This maintains the current status quo in Oklahoma regarding direct funding for religious schools operating as charter schools. The decision has broader implications for the charter school movement. Charter schools are publicly funded but independently managed. They represent a growing, though still relatively small, segment of the U.S. education landscape. This ruling, particularly if the 6-3 majority opinion by Chief Justice Roberts is the accurate account, could set a significant precedent. It would reinforce the idea that charter schools, despite their operational independence, cannot be explicitly religious institutions if they receive public funds. This clarifies a key boundary for charter school authorizers nationwide. This ruling may not be the final word on the matter. It could prompt further legislative efforts at both state and federal levels. Some lawmakers might try to redefine the boundaries of public funding for education to accommodate religious providers more explicitly. Conversely, others may seek to strengthen the separation. The decision is also likely to spur further legal challenges. Cases testing different models of indirect aid or other forms of partnership with religious educational entities may emerge, continuing to probe the limits of the Establishment Clause. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's decision regarding St. Isidore highlights the enduring tension in American society. It underscores the delicate balance between protecting religious liberty, promoting educational choice, and upholding the constitutional separation of church and state. Whether the court issued a narrow ruling based on a tie or a broader one with a majority opinion, the underlying debate persists. The case serves as a potent reminder of how deeply these issues resonate and how they continue to shape public policy and legal interpretation in the United States.